When we first moved into Willow Creek Estates, it felt like stepping into a postcard. The streets were lined with cherry blossom trees that danced in the wind. Every lawn looked freshly manicured, and neighbors waved as if we'd been friends for years. The HOA brochure promised safety, community, and order. It all sounded perfect, too perfect. My husband, Tom, loved it right away. "Finally, a place that actually cares about its residents," he said as we unpacked boxes. I wanted to believe him, but even in those first few days, I noticed something off. There were cameras on nearly every lamppost, and HOA patrol cars circled the block at odd hours. Once, a golf cart with flashing lights slowed in front of our driveway, the driver jotting notes on a clipboard. I laughed nervously, thinking maybe it was part of their routine. But when I waved, he didn't wave back. He just stared, cold and silent, before driving away. At the first HOA meeting, the president, Ms. Dalton, took the stage like she owned the world. She spoke in rehearsed smiles and fake kindness, talking about protecting the neighborhood from rule breakers. Everyone applauded, but her eyes told a different story, sharp, calculating, and territorial. She watched every hand that went up, every whisper in the back row. I brushed off the unease, telling myself I was just adjusting to community life. But deep down, something didn't feel right. It wasn't just about keeping lawns neat or driveways clean. It felt like the HOA was watching, waiting, as if control, not safety, was their true mission. And soon, I'd find out just how far they were willing to go to keep that control, even if it meant sending fake cops to my door. Ms. Dalton wasn't just an HOA president. She was a ruler in a perfectly ironed blouse. She carried a clipboard like it was a weapon and spoke with the kind of authority that made even grown men hesitate. Every week, she patrolled the neighborhood like a general inspecting her troops, noting down infractions, a misplaced trash can, a garden hose left out, a porch light left on past curfew. She claimed it was all about standards, but it felt more like surveillance. Tom never feared her. In fact, he challenged her from day one. "You're not the law, Ms. Dalton," he told her after she fined us for a garden shed that was an inch too tall. I'll never forget the way she looked at him, a slow, venomous smile curling across her face. "Oh, I assure you, Mr. Walker," she said softly. "Around here, I am the law." That's when the letters started. At first, they were petty violation notices, grass too long, mailbox not uniform. But then they got personal. "Failure to comply may result in community enforcement action," one read. Another one simply said, "We warned you." It wasn't the HOA logo that bothered me. It was the signature. Instead of the usual printed board name, it was handwritten in black ink, M. Dalton. Tom laughed it off, calling her Queen Karen of Willow Creek. But I could tell it was getting to him. Every night, he'd look out the window, watching the HOA's so-called security patrol circle our street. The same black SUV, always at the same time, engine idling under the streetlight. "They're watching," I whispered one night. He smiled and said, "Then let them watch." He didn't know then that Ms. Dalton had something far worse planned, something that would turn our quiet neighborhood into a nightmare. The warnings started small, almost laughable at first. A bright yellow notice taped to our front door. "Non-compliance will not be tolerated." Then another, slipped under the windshield wiper of Tom's truck. "Final warning." We thought it was just Ms. Dalton playing her petty games again, trying to scare us into silence. But this time, it felt different. The tone was colder. The messages were no longer signed by the HOA. They were anonymous. At night, strange things began happening. The motion sensor lights on our porch would flicker on for no reason. We'd wake up to the sound of footsteps crunching gravel outside. One morning, I found muddy boot prints on our back patio, too large to be Tom's. He called it a prank, but I could see the unease growing in his eyes. Then came the calls. Blocked numbers, always late, always silent. When I answered once, a voice whispered, "You should have just listened." I froze. The line went dead. Tom decided to confront the HOA directly. He stormed into the next meeting, demanding answers. But as he spoke, I saw Ms. Dalton sitting at the head of the table, smiling like a cat watching a trapped mouse. "Mr. Walker," she said sweetly, "if you believe you're being harassed, perhaps you should look closer to home. We only enforce the rules." The room erupted in murmurs. Some neighbors nodded in agreement, others looked away. After that meeting, the warnings stopped, for a while. But in their place came something worse: silence. The kind that hums in your walls and makes every shadow look alive. We didn't know it yet, but the HOA's game had only just begun, and the next move would come with flashing lights and handcuffs. It was a Friday night, calm, quiet, the kind of evening where the world feels still. Tom and I were watching a movie when we heard it, a deep, commanding bang at the door. "Police, open up!" The sound ripped through the silence like a gunshot. We froze. Another bang, harder this time. The voice outside was harsh, male, authoritative. Tom got up, confused but not scared. "Maybe it's a mistake," he said, heading toward the door. I followed him, my heart racing. Through the frosted glass, I saw the glow of flashing red and blue lights, and 3 dark figures standing on our porch. They wore police uniforms, badges gleaming under the porch light. One of them shouted again, "Open the door now, or we're coming in." Tom cracked the door open just an inch. "What's this about?" he asked. Before he could finish, they pushed it open and forced their way inside. One grabbed Tom by the arm, twisting it behind his back. "You're under arrest for HOA violations and property damage," the man barked. I screamed, "HOA violations? That wasn't even a real law." Tom struggled, shouting for them to show a warrant. One of them flashed a fake badge so fast I barely caught the word security under the seal. They cuffed him and dragged him toward the door. "Ma'am, stay back," one yelled as I tried to follow. I could hear my husband's voice outside, angry and scared, demanding answers. Then I saw her, Ms. Dalton, standing at the edge of the driveway with a flashlight and that same chilling smile. She wasn't shocked or confused. She was pleased. "Finally taking action," she said calmly to one of the men. "About time someone enforced the rules." That's when it hit me. These weren't real cops. The badges, the SUV, the uniforms, all fake. My husband was being kidnapped in front of our home by people working for the HOA. And the woman responsible for it all stood there, arms crossed, watching like she was proud of her masterpiece. The sound of those fake sirens faded into the night, but Ms. Dalton's smirk burned itself into my memory. She stood there on the curb, calm and collected, as my husband struggled in handcuffs just a few feet away. I ran toward her, my voice shaking with fury. "What have you done?" I screamed. She didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head, her smile widening as the black SUV's headlights swept across her face. "Oh dear," she said softly, as if she were speaking to a child. "If your husband had just followed the rules, none of this would have been necessary." "The rules?" I shouted, tears stinging my eyes. "You sent fake cops to our house. You can't do this." She stepped closer, lowering her voice until only I could hear. "You think anyone's going to believe you over me? I have witnesses, reports, video footage. You'll only make it worse for him." That S, when I saw it, her name tag glinting in the porch light. Community Safety Director. She'd given herself a title that didn't even exist in the HOA bylaws. Every word, every threat, every power move. It all led to this moment. The SUV door slammed, and the fake officers started pulling out of the driveway. I tried to chase them, but one of the men shoved me back. "Stay inside, ma'am," he said coldly. Ms. Dalton's smirk never faded. "Don't worry," she whispered. "He'll learn his lesson." I stood in the middle of the road, barefoot, trembling, watching those taillights vanish into the dark. The neighborhood that once felt so perfect was now a prison, ruled by a woman drunk on power. My husband was gone, and I had no idea where they were taking him. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I called 911. This time, I was calling the real police. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely punch the numbers on my phone. When the dispatcher answered, I could barely form words. My voice cracked between panic and rage. My husband's been taken. They said they were police, but they weren't. They weren't real. The dispatcher's tone shifted instantly. Within minutes, I heard the distant wail of sirens. This time, the real ones. 2 squad cars screeched into the neighborhood, lights cutting through the dark. I ran into the street, waving frantically. They took him. They were in a black SUV. Fake badges, fake uniforms. The officers calmed me down, taking notes as I described everything. The SUV, the men, the uniforms, and Ms. Dalton standing there as it all happened. As one officer questioned me, the other walked straight toward her house. And there she was, standing in her driveway like she'd been expecting them. Her arms folded, chin high, acting as though she was in control. "Good evening, officers," she said smoothly. "I was just enforcing community standards. Those men are part of our contracted security team." The officer's expression hardened. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "impersonating a police officer is a felony. Who authorized this security team?" She hesitated for the first time. "It was HOA business. Our residents." "Cut the act," the officer snapped. "Where are they taking the man they arrested?" She tried to deflect, but the police weren't having it. Within an hour, a bolo was out for the black SUV. And then, almost poetically, the SUV came speeding back into the neighborhood, trying to slip past unnoticed. The real cops surrounded it instantly. One of the fake officers jumped out, hands in the air. The others tried to run. It was chaos, sirens blaring, shouting, handcuffs snapping shut. As they pulled the men from the SUV, I saw Tom in the back seat, shaken, wrists red, eyes wide with disbelief. The moment our eyes met, I felt everything hit me at once: fear, anger, and overwhelming relief. The officer opened the door and said, "Ma'am, your husband's safe now." And standing behind it all, Ms. Dalton's smirk was gone, replaced by the look of someone who finally realized the game was over. The days that followed felt surreal, like living in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The police launched a full investigation, and the truth about the HOA's so-called security team began to unravel, piece by piece. It turned out the men in uniforms weren't officers at all. They were unlicensed private security contractors, hired through a shell company registered under Ms. Dalton's brother-in-law's name. Every badge, every official document they carried was fake. I sat in the police station with Tom, listening as the detectives described how meticulously the HOA had orchestrated everything. They had studied our schedules, our routines, even our comings and goings from work. They had trained their imposter officers to appear authoritative, to intimidate, and to scare anyone who dared to oppose Ms. Dalton. The investigators also uncovered hidden HOA funds, diverted to pay this private team. It was more than harassment. It was premeditated intimidation, financial fraud, and conspiracy. Every complaint we had ever received from the HOA, the fines, the rule violations, now took on a new, sinister meaning. They weren't rules. They were weapons. Neighbors began to come forward, sharing their own stories of intimidation, odd visits from uniformed strangers, and late-night inspections. It was a pattern. Ms. Dalton had been using fear to control the entire community. What we thought was a quaint, orderly neighborhood was actually a network of surveillance, deception, and coercion. And through it all, the one truth became clear. The HOA President's obsession with power wasn't a quirk. It was dangerous. And finally, with the police digging into her web of lies, the nightmare that began with a single knock at our door was starting to unravel. Word spread through Willow Creek Estates like wildfire. First came whispers in the mailroom, then text chains, and finally a neighborhood meeting called not by the HOA, but by concerned residents. People who had once nodded politely at Ms. Dalton's rules were now speaking out, recounting late-night visits, threats, and unexplained fines. Their faces showed relief and anger in equal measure. Finally, they weren't alone. At the meeting, Ms. Dalton tried to maintain her composure, standing at the podium like she always had. But the room was different now. Neighbors didn't listen to her sweet, rehearsed speeches anymore. They shouted back, accusing her of harassment, intimidation, and fraud. The security company's records, which she had relied on as proof of authority, were shown to everyone, exposing the full extent of her lies. The HOA board members, many of whom had been complicit or afraid, started resigning one by one. Even her most loyal supporters realized they could no longer protect her. The illusion of control she had maintained for years was crumbling. It wasn't just about our family anymore. The entire neighborhood had been living under a reign of fear. And now, united, the community was fighting back. People who had once been silent were demanding change, demanding accountability, demanding justice. By the end of that week, the HOA had lost all credibility. Ms. Dalton's smirk was gone from every street corner, replaced by whispers of lawsuits and criminal investigations. For the first time in years, Willow Creek felt like a neighborhood again, not a kingdom ruled by fear. The day the charges were filed felt surreal. Tom, once shaken and vulnerable, now stood with a quiet strength I had never seen before. The fake officers who had kidnapped him were arrested for impersonating law enforcement, conspiracy, and harassment. Ms. Dalton herself was finally facing the consequences of years of manipulation, conspiracy, fraud, and intimidation. Court proceedings were intense. Neighbors came forward as witnesses, detailing the years of surveillance, harassment, and threats. Emails, letters, and secretly recorded phone calls were presented as evidence, each one a nail in the coffin of Ms. Dalton's control. For once, the neighborhood's fear could not silence the truth. Tom received a formal apology from the police and, eventually, a settlement for the ordeal he endured. But more than compensation, it was the restoration of his dignity that mattered most. The trauma of being handcuffed and dragged from our home was permanent, yet justice gave him the power back that had been stolen in a single terrifying night. Even the community felt vindicated. People were no longer afraid to speak their minds or enjoy their homes without constant anxiety. The HOA, stripped of its power and legitimacy, was dissolved. Ms. Dalton's empire of fear had crumbled, and in its place rose a neighborhood that valued honesty, transparency, and true community. For Tom and for all of us, justice wasn't just a word on a court document. It was the reclaiming of our lives, our safety, and our freedom. The sun rose over Willow Creek Estates like a promise, warm, golden, and untainted by the shadows of fear that had once gripped the neighborhood. The HOA's reign of control was over. Ms. Dalton had been removed, the fake security officers prosecuted, and the board dissolved. For the first time in years, we could step outside without glancing nervously over our shoulders, without the heavy weight of surveillance and intimidation pressing down on us. Tom and I walked our street, hand in hand, marveling at the normalcy we had once taken for granted. Neighbors waved from their porches, some still cautious, others smiling freely, no longer afraid to reclaim their own lives. Children played in yards that had once felt like cages, and the street that had been eerily silent at night now hummed with life. We had learned a harsh truth. Power in the wrong hands could turn a dream neighborhood into a nightmare. But we had also learned something far more important. Courage, unity, and the refusal to be silenced can topple even the most calculated tyranny. Looking at Tom, I knew we had survived something far greater than fear. We had survived deception, intimidation, and a night that could have destroyed us. And now, with the HOA gone and justice served, freedom wasn't just a word. It was a lived reality, a life reclaimed, a neighborhood reborn, and a community ready to never let darkness take hold again. Willow Creek Estates was ours again, and this time it belonged to the people, not the tyrants.